She didn't pull a trigger. She didn't make a threat. She simply moved her hands and stopped a crime lord from walking out into the night. But in doing so, she became the most dangerous thing a woman in Chicago could be, someone Dominic Moretti cared about. Now, two criminal families want to use her, and only one man can protect her. The question is, at what cost? On this channel, we live for stories where power meets vulnerability. Mob bosses, forbidden love, bewoten, and the quiet heroism hiding in ordinary people. Remember, real strength isn't about what you own or who fears you. It's about who you choose to protect. Stay with us until the end. Then like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me, would you have stepped forward that night?
The Onyx Room was more than just a restaurant. It was a fortress, masquerading as a fine dining establishment. Situated in Chicago's affluent Gold Coast, it served as a sanctuary where the city's powerful could pretend they were saints. The light fixtures were worth more than an average home. The velvet curtains could smother any sound, and the waitstaff were trained to be as unnoticeable as the air. Sophie Bennett was an expert at being unnoticeable. At 23, Sophie was like a ghost in a black uniform. She had perfected the silent step, moving so lightly that she never made a floorboard creak, a glass rattle, or an eye turn. She was the person who took your coat, only to be forgotten 5 seconds later, the one who refilled your water before you noticed it was low. But tonight, the atmosphere in the kitchen was thick with a heavy tension, like the calm before a storm. "He is on his way." The manager, Mr. Halloway, whispered, dabbing a spot of sweat from his shiny head. This man, typically cool and composed, suddenly looked like he might be sick. Table 1, the private booth. The tablecloths must be ironed a second time. The silverware needs to be polished until it shines like a mirror. Am I clear? The kitchen staff erupted into controlled chaos. Head chefs yelled orders while junior chefs shook. Sophie stood near the coffee machine, polishing a single spoon. Her heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against her chest. "Who is it?" asked Chloe, a new hostess whose makeup was too heavy and whose sense of self-preservation was too light. "Moretti," a prep cook said, his eyes fixed on the onions he was chopping. "Dominic Moretti." The name landed with the force of a solid steel weight. The newspapers referred to him as a logistics expert. The streets knew him as the undisputed king of Chicago. He assumed control of the family enterprise 3 years prior, after his father was shot down on Wacker Drive. Since that time, the crime rate in his districts had curiously decreased, mainly because any unauthorized offenders had a habit of disappearing. He was 32, brutally handsome, and known for being a man of few words. If Moretti spoke to you, you were fine. If he fell silent, you were already gone. "He is bringing a guest," Halloway said, snapping his fingers in Sophie's direction. "Bennett, you will handle water and bread service for the main dining area. Do not go near table 1. I am assigning Pierre to that table. Pierre knows how to handle our more demanding clientele." Sophie nodded, keeping her gaze down. "Yes, sir." The last place she wanted to be was near table 1. Her only goal was to finish her work, get her tips, and return to her quiet apartment in Rogers Park. She had rent due, and her grandmother's medical bills were stacking up on her counter like a snowbank. She simply could not afford to get into any trouble. But trouble has a knack for seeking out the quiet ones. By 8 p.m., the restaurant was filled with a low hum of activity. The lights were lowered to a warm, amber hue. Sophie glided between tables, pouring water, skillfully avoiding the wandering hands of tipsy stockbrokers and keeping her head down. And then, the main doors swung open. It was not a typical arrival. The restaurant's ambient chatter did not just quiet down, it was cut off completely. Conversations died in the middle of a word. Silverware stopped on its way to open mouths. Dominic Moretti had entered. He was even taller than he appeared in the grainy tabloid pictures. He was dressed in a dark gray suit that seemed molded to his body, expertly tailored to conceal the weapon everyone knew he carried. His dark hair was combed back, revealing a face with sharp, defined features and a total lack of any visible emotion. His eyes scanned the room, a predator assessing the area, before he turned just slightly. He was not by himself, and his companion was not a fashion model, a bodyguard, or a top associate. He was offering his arm to a frail, elderly woman. She was petite, wearing a simple black dress with a lace collar that seemed from the 1950s. Her hair was stark white, tied back in a tight bun. She held onto Dominic's arm with a desperate strength that made her knuckles pale. She looked absolutely petrified. This was Isabella Moretti, the family ghost. Information about Dominic's mother was scarce. Some whispered she was unstable, others claimed she was ill. Most were not even aware she was still alive, as she had disappeared from public view years ago. Dominic guided her through the now silent room. A team of 4 bodyguards surrounded them, their eyes meticulously checking every corner, every person who moved too quickly. They arrived at table 1, the private booth enclosed by thick velvet drapes. Sophie was just 3 tables away, serving a couple who were bickering over a prenuptial agreement. She could feel the intense coldness coming from the group. She noticed Pierre, the head waiter, was perspiring as he neared their table. Pierre, who was French and usually smugly confident, now had the look of a man on his way to his own execution. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti," Pierre began, his voice trembling just a little. "Madame, it is a pleasure to have you at the Onyx Room." Dominic paid him no attention. His focus was completely on his mother. He carefully pulled her chair out, helping her sit with a gentleness that seemed out of place for a man with his fearsome reputation. He straightened her shawl. He shifted a candle a little farther from her hand. "Ma," Dominic said, his voice quiet and rough. He leaned closer to her. "Are you all right?" The old woman gave no response. She just stared blankly at the tablecloth, her eyes distant and unfocused. She seemed confused and overwhelmed by the dim lights and the dancing flames of the candles. "She is fine," Dominic stated to no one in particular, even as his jaw clenched. He turned to Pierre. "We require a moment. Get some water. No ice, just room temperature." "At once, monsieur." Sophie observed from a distance, catching it all from the corner of her eye. She noticed the stress in Dominic's posture. It was not the anxiety of a crime boss worried about an attack. It was the strain of a son who felt he was letting someone down. She knew that expression well. She had seen it in her own reflection more times than she could count. 20 minutes went by. The unease in the restaurant had settled into a tense buzz, yet everyone's gaze kept shifting toward table 1. Something was clearly going wrong. Pierre had gone back to the table on 3 separate occasions. Every time he walked away, he looked more flustered and frantic. Mr. Halloway was nervously walking back and forth near the kitchen entrance, wringing his hands. Sophie was clearing a nearby table, trying to remain inconspicuous, when the sound of raised voices came from the private alcove. "I told you, ask her what it is she wants." Dominic's voice was getting louder. It was not a full shout, but it had the low growl of an approaching storm. "I have tried, Monsieur Moretti," Pierre said with a stammer. "I have described the daily specials. I recommended the branzino. She is not responding to me at all." "She is not an idiot," Dominic retorted. "She is just—" He stopped himself, rubbing a hand across his tired face. "Just get the menu again. Bring the one that has pictures. Do you have one with pictures?" "This is a Michelin-starred restaurant, monsieur," Pierre said, his professional pride briefly overcoming his common sense. "We do not offer menus with pictures." Dominic shot up from his seat. The chair leg made a loud scraping sound on the floor, as startling as a gunshot. "Then figure out what she wants to eat," Dominic snarled. "She has not eaten for 2 days. She is frightened. She is disoriented. And you are just standing there listing French words that she cannot comprehend." "I am speaking in English, sir. She is unable to hear you," Dominic finally roared. The restaurant was plunged into absolute silence once more. Dominic stopped, aware that he had just yelled. He looked down toward his mother. Isabella had not even reacted to his outburst. She continued to look at the tablecloth, pulling at a small, loose thread, completely lost in her own silent world. "She is deaf," Dominic explained, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. "She lost her hearing 3 years ago. The hearing aids bother her skin, so she refuses to wear them. She can read lips, but the lighting in here is too dim. She is not able to see your mouth." Pierre appeared completely at a loss. "I could bring a notepad and pen. She has severe arthritis," Dominic shot back. "She cannot hold a pen for very long. Just look at her hands." Isabella's hands were knotted, her fingers curled inward. She glanced up at Dominic, her eyes filled with confusion. She let out a small, frustrated noise, a deep sound that people who cannot hear sometimes make when trying to speak, without being able to monitor their own voice. A few patrons nearby stirred in their seats. A woman in a red gown let out a nervous laugh. Dominic's head whipped around toward the sound. His eyes were absolutely lethal. "Is there something amusing you?" he asked. The woman in red turned as white as a sheet. "No, I just—" "Get out," Dominic ordered. "I beg your pardon? Leave. Now." The woman and her date quickly got up, abandoning their half-finished meals, and all but ran to the exit. Dominic turned his attention back to Pierre. "I need someone who can communicate with her. Now. Find an employee who understands sign language. American Sign Language. You have 50 people working here. Surely one of them knows it." Holloway, the manager, scurried over. "Mr. Moretti, I offer my sincerest apologies. I am afraid we do not have anyone on our staff with that specific training. I could attempt to interpret if we type it on a tablet." "She despises screens," Dominic said, his patience completely gone. "She is convinced they are used to spy on her. I chose this place because she always loved it model 20 years ago. All I wanted was one decent meal." His eyes went to his mother. Isabella seemed to be on the verge of tears. Her hand fumbled on the table for water, but the glass was just beyond her grasp. "Let's just go," Dominic said, his voice laced with defeat. "We are leaving." He began to move his mother's chair. This was the exact disaster he had feared. If Moretti departed in anger, the Onyx Room's reputation would be tainted. Deliveries would cease. Health inspectors would suddenly find problems. The restaurant would be finished within a month. Holloway glanced frantically at his employees. "Does anybody here know sign language? A $5,000 bonus right now." The staff stared at the floor. The kitchen crew shook their heads. Pierre examined the ceiling. Sophie was standing near the water station. Her heart pounded against her ribs so fiercely she feared they would bruise. She knew the language. Her little brother, Toby, had been deaf from birth. For 10 years, she was his voice, his ears, and his connection to the hearing world, until meningitis took him 2 years prior. Her hands still knew the movements. Her soul still recalled the quiet. But to step up and approach Dominic Moretti, a man who had just thrown a couple out for laughing too loud, a man whose very name was spoken with dread. "Don't you dare, Sophie," her mind screamed. "Just stay invisible." She watched Dominic. He was awkwardly trying to help his mother get to her feet. Isabella resisted, looking distressed and confused, likely believing she had done something wrong to cause their early departure. She appeared so frail. In that moment, Sophie saw her own grandmother in the woman's face. She saw Toby's frustration. Before her mind could command her body to stop, Sophie moved one foot forward, then the other. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Holloway spun toward her. "Bennett? What is it?" "Not right now." Sophie took a breath to steady herself. She held her serving tray like it was a shield. "I can help." Dominic paused. He turned around very slowly to look at her. Sophie could feel the intensity of his stare. It was a heavy physical pressure. He looked her over, from her worn-out shoes to the messy bun in her hair. His expression was doubtful, almost offended that this small, trembling waitress would dare to speak. "You?" Dominic questioned. You know American Sign Language? Yes, sir, Sophie whispered back. I am fluent. Dominic held her gaze for a long, painful moment. Finally, he motioned toward the table. You have 2 minutes, he stated. If you are wasting my time, you will never find a job in this town again. Sophie gave a slight nod. She placed her tray on a nearby stand. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her apron. She walked right past a bewildered Pierre and a terrified Holloway, entering the warm candlelight of Table 1. She did not look at Dominic. Instead, she knelt by Isabella's chair. Kneeling was a serious violation of the rules. Waitstaff were supposed to stand, but Sophie understood that to be understood, she first had to be seen. She had to meet her at eye level. Isabella jumped when Sophie suddenly appeared beside her. The elderly woman's eyes shot to Dominic in a panic. Sophie offered a smile. It was not a forced smile for a customer. It was gentle and real. She lifted her hands. Hello, Sophie signed. Her motions were smooth, well-practiced, and elegant. My name is Sophie. You look lovely this evening. Isabella went still. Her eyes grew wide. The terror on her face gave way to pure astonishment. Dominic observed like a predator, his hand held close to his coat. Isabella hesitantly lifted her own knotted hands. Her fingers were stiff with arthritis, moving in slow, shaky gestures. You speak with your hands, Isabella signed in reply. Yes, Sophie signed back. I am your server for tonight. The food is very good here, but the chef is a little grumpy. Isabella blinked. Then a small, miraculous smile appeared on her lips. She let out a quiet, raspy chuckle. My son is grumpy too, Isabella signed, nodding toward Dominic. Sophie looked up at Dominic for a second. He was staring at her, his lips parted slightly. His gaze shifted from his mother's smiling face to Sophie's moving hands. He loves you very much, Sophie signed to Isabella. He just wants you to have a wonderful dinner. What are you in the mood for? Something soft, perhaps? Or something spicy? Isabella's shoulders relaxed, dropping 3 inches. All the tension seemed to drain from her. She leaned closer to Sophie. I would like the scallops. And wine. Red wine. But do not tell him. He believes I should only drink water. Sophie chuckled quietly. She turned her attention to Dominic. She would like the scallops, sir, and a glass of Pinot Noir. She also mentioned specifically that you are not to know about the wine. Dominic looked over at his mother. Isabella gave him a challenging look, clutching her napkin tightly. For the first time that evening, the harshness in Dominic's expression softened. He looked at Sophie, truly saw her. She wants wine? He asked, his voice much quieter now. Yes, sir. Give her the whole bottle, Dominic ordered. Sophie turned back to Isabella and signed. He said it is okay. You are the boss. Isabella beamed with joy. She reached out a hand and gently patted Sophie's cheek. Dominic slowly sat back down. His bodyguards visibly relaxed. Holloway sagged against a wall, overcome with relief. What was your name again? Dominic asked, his gaze fixed on Sophie's face. Sophie, sir. Sophie Bennett. Sophie, he said again, as if tasting the word. You are not going anywhere, Sophie. You will be serving our table tonight. Only you. Tell Pierre to leave. Yes, sir. Sophie rose to her feet, her legs shaking. She had done it. She had made it through. But as she turned to go to the kitchen, she felt Dominic's eyes on her. He was no longer looking at her as just a waitress. He was looking at her like she was a riddle he was determined to figure out. That is when she noticed him. A man sitting at the bar, 3 seats away, watching everything in the mirror's reflection. He was not looking at Dominic. His eyes were on her. And when he realized she saw him, he tapped his nose twice. A chill ran down Sophie's spine. It was their signal. Sophie escaped to the kitchen, her pulse hammering a wild beat inside her chest. The large swinging doors closed, silencing the murmur of the dining room and throwing her back into the clamor of banging pots and yelling chefs, but the sound seemed far away, muted by the roar of blood in her own ears. Holloway rushed over, his face red with excitement. "You are a miracle worker. I saw them laughing. Laughing! The Moretti table is actually laughing. Do you have any idea what this means for us?" Sophie held onto the stainless steel counter, her knuckles turning white. "I just need a moment, Mr. Holloway. Take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes. Help yourself to a tart." Holloway was practically bouncing with energy. "Just get back out there and make sure the Queen Mother stays happy. If tonight goes well, I can guarantee a promotion is coming your way." Sophie just nodded, feeling numb, and ducked into the dry storage pantry, pulling the door shut behind her. In the faint light, surrounded by bags of flour and large cans of tomatoes, she finally allowed the fear to wash over her. She slid to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. The man at the bar. She knew who he was. Not by name, but she knew his kind. He was Mick the Rat O'Shea, a low-level collector for the O'Hanlon crew, the Irish syndicate that ran the Southside docks. They were the very reason her father had skipped town 5 years ago, leaving Sophie and her ailing grandmother with a debt that never got smaller, no matter how many extra shifts she picked up. The tap on the nose was not a friendly gesture. It was a clear message. "We are watching you. We know your job. We know your address." And now, the O'Hanlons had seen her getting friendly with Dominic Moretti, the bitter rival of every other crime family in Chicago. To a man like Mick, this did not look like good service. It looked like Sophie was choosing an alliance. "Breathe," she signed to herself there in the dark. Just breathe. She could not leave. If she ran, they would find her grandmother's nursing home. She had to see the shift through. She had to act as if everything was perfectly fine. Sophie threw cold water on her face from the prep sink, adjusted her apron, and stepped back out onto the dining room floor. As she came near table 1, she noticed the entire mood had changed. The dreadful silence was gone. Isabella was enjoying her scallops, her face alive with expression as she signed animatedly to Dominic. Dominic was leaning forward, concentrating on his mother's hands with an effort that pained Sophie to see. He was trying his best to follow along, but he was missing most of it. Sophie moved into the light. Dominic glanced up, and for a brief moment, his defenses lowered. He actually looked relieved that she was back. "She is telling a story," Dominic said in a low voice. "It is about a bird, I think. A bluebird." Sophie watched Isabella's hands, and the blue jay snatched the ribbon right from the porch railing. Your father laughed so hard that he spilled his coffee. "It was a blue jay," Sophie translated quietly as she refilled the wine for Isabella. "It took a ribbon from her porch. Your father laughed and spilled his coffee." Dominic's eyes widened in recognition. A small smile touched his lips, a genuine one this time. "I remember that day. I was 6 years old. It was my birthday ribbon." He looked at his mother and gave a clumsy nod, signing back, "I remember." Isabella clapped her hands together without a sound, her eyes wrinkling at the corners. She turned back to Sophie. "He was such a messy child," Isabella signed. "He always had dirt on his knees. Now he wears these expensive suits and looks like he is going to a funeral." Sophie had to suppress a giggle. "She says you were a messy child, and she thinks you now dress like a funeral director." Dominic actually chuckled. It was a deep, unused sound, like an old engine finally turning over. The noise was so unexpected it made heads turn all across the restaurant. The entire staff froze in place. Dominic Moretti let out a laugh. "Tell her these suits are worth more than this entire building," Dominic said, his gaze fixed on Sophie. A current passed between them, something more than just gratitude. It was the unique closeness that comes from translation. Sophie formed a bridge from his heart to his mother's understanding. For a man in control of everything except this single, frustrating silence, Sophie held all the power in the room. "So, Sophie," Dominic said, leaning back as he swirled his wine, "where did you learn? You mentioned you are fluent." "My brother," Sophie replied softly. "Toby, he was born deaf." Dominic noted the past tense instantly. He passed away 2 years ago. Dominic's face clouded over with compassion. I am sorry. Truly. He would have liked you, Sophie lied. Toby would have been petrified of Dominic. Toby liked men who protected their mothers. Dominic just stared at her. The air in the room suddenly felt thin. It was electric. And you? Dominic asked. Who protects you, Sophie? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. A chill traced its way up Sophie's spine. She glanced over at the bar's entrance. The stool Mick had been occupying was now vacant. But something was left on the bar counter. It was a cocktail napkin, held down by a single cherry stem. I can take care of myself, sir, Sophie answered, her voice shaking just a little. I doubt that, Dominic murmured. He reached inside his jacket and produced a business card. The card was black, with nothing but a gold phone number embossed on it. If anyone gives you trouble, management, customers, anyone, you call this direct line, 24 hours a day. He pushed the card across the white tablecloth. Sophie looked at it. Accepting that card felt dangerous. It was like signing a contract, but refusing it could be a deep insult. Isabella reached over and gently tapped Sophie's hand. Take it. He is a bear, but he is a good bear. Sophie picked up the card, sliding it into her apron pocket. Thank you, Mr. Moretti. Dominic, he corrected her. Mr. Moretti was my father, and he is the one who would have definitely spilled that coffee. The dinner began to wind down. Isabella passed on dessert but requested some tea. The restaurant was nearly empty by the time they prepared to leave. Dominic rose and assisted his mother with her heavy wool coat. He looked at Sophie. Walk us to the door? He asked. It was not a request. Sophie escorted them to the valet stand. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was harsh, slicing right through her thin uniform. The bodyguards moved into a protective formation. A polished black SUV pulled up to the curb. Before she got in, Isabella gave Sophie a hug. It was a surprisingly strong, bony embrace. Thank you, little bird, she signed. Dominic was standing by the open car door. The streetlights carved sharp shadows onto his face. He watched Sophie as she shivered in the biting cold. Do you have a coat? He asked. It is inside. I need to finish my side work. Right. He paused, as if he wanted to say more. The tip is already included. But this? He pushed a folded bundle of cash into her hand. This is for the conversation. You gave me my mother back for one night. I do not forget favors, Sophie. It was my pleasure, Dominic. He held her eyes for a moment longer than necessary, then gave a slight nod and entered the car. The heavy door clicked shut. The SUV sped off, melting into the Chicago night. Sophie remained there for a second, clutching the bills. She felt a warmth spread through her despite the chill. Then she recalled the napkin. She hurried back inside, past the staff clearing tables, and made her way to the bar. The napkin was still sitting there. She picked it up. Scrawled in what looked like jagged red ink from a drink stirrer were 3 words. The alley. Now. Sophie felt her stomach plummet. She glanced toward the back exit. The alley was the only route to the employee lockers and her bus stop. She checked the front door. It was locked. The manager had already lowered the security gate. Her only way out was through the back. She was cornered. The alley behind the Onyx room was a tight canyon of brick and steam. Dumpsters were pushed against one wall, overflowing with the evening's trash. A single flickering bulb over a steel security door provided the only light. Sophie stepped outside, her coat pulled tightly around her. The cold air carried the smell of garbage and snow. She gripped her purse strap with both hands until her knuckles hurt. Hello, she whispered. There was no answer, only the far-off sound of a siren and the dripping from an air conditioning unit. She began to walk quickly, her head down, focused on the streetlight at the end of the alley. Her steps echoed on the damp pavement. Click, clack, click, clack. Then, a shadow peeled away from the wall. Sophie gasped and spun around. Mick O'Shea moved into the faint light. He was a thin man with a sharp face and eyes like shattered glass. He had on a cheap leather jacket and was chewing a toothpick. Behind him, two other men stepped out from behind the dumpsters. They were larger, slower, and wore hooded sweatshirts. Mick, Sophie breathed. I do not have the money. Not until the first of the month. You already know the schedule. Mick let out a dry, scratching laugh. He moved closer, invading her personal space. She could smell old cigarettes and peppermint liquor on his breath. This is not about the money, sweetheart. Although that interest is certainly adding up. Grandma's nursing home is not cheap, is it? Leave her out of this, Sophie said, her voice trembling. I am just a concerned citizen, Mick sneered. He reached out, his fingers brushing the lapel of her coat. We saw you tonight, with the butcher, looking very cozy. A lot of hand-waving, a lot of smiles. I was just doing my job, Sophie stammered, backing away until her back hit the cold brick wall. His mother is deaf. I was only translating, that is all. Mick slammed his hand hard against the wall right next to her head. Sophie flinched, and a small cry escaped her. Do not lie to me, Mick hissed. You were whispering to him. You were laughing. Moretti does not laugh. What did you tell him? Did you tell him about us? About your father's debt? No, I swear. We just talked about the food. Bull, Mick spat. He leaned in so close his nose almost touched hers. This is how it is going to be, Sophie. You are in a special position. You are going to be our ears now. Since you are so skilled with your hands, you will use them to help us. What? What do you mean? The next time he comes in, you listen. You find out where he is moving that shipment next Thursday, and you find out who he is meeting. Mick grinned, showing his yellow teeth. And if you do not, well, old ladies have very brittle bones. Accidents happen in nursing homes all the time. A fall down the stairs, slipping in the bathtub. Sophie felt sick to her stomach. Please, I cannot. He will kill me. He might, Mick shrugged. But I definitely will. So you get to choose, the butcher or the rat. He reached into her pocket. Sophie went rigid. He pulled out the bundle of cash Dominic had given her. Consider this a down payment, Mick said, stuffing the money into his pocket. Now get out of here, and remember, we are watching. Mick started to walk away, his thugs laughing quietly. Sophie slid down the wall, hot tears streaming down her face. She was going to be sick. The money was gone. She was caught between two rival mobs, and her grandmother was now a target. Hey, Mick! A voice called out from the shadows. It was not Sophie's voice. It was deep, calm, and held a terrifying authority. Mick froze in place. He turned around slowly, looking toward the alley's entrance. A figure was outlined by the streetlights. The red glow of a cigar briefly lit up a strong jawline. Dominic Moretti. He was not by himself. Two of his bodyguards, who were mountains of men in wool coats, were blocking the only exit. Mr. Moretti, Mick stammered, all of his earlier confidence gone. We were just having a conversation with the girl. We are old family friends. Dominic took a long, slow draw from his cigar and breathed out a cloud of smoke. He walked forward, his steps heavy and measured. He stopped 3 feet from Mick, looming over him. She is a waitress, Mick, Dominic said in a casual tone. She serves pasta. She pours wine. She does not have friends like you. It is a misunderstanding, Dom, Mr. Moretti. Her father owed the O'Sheas. We are just collecting a debt, is that right? Dominic glanced past Mick at Sophie, who was huddled against the wall. She was shaking uncontrollably. For just a moment, Dominic's eyes softened, then they turned as hard as black diamonds when he looked back at Mick. She served my mother tonight, Dominic said quietly. She made my mother smile. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Look, take the money, Mick said. He pulled the bundle of cash from his pocket and held it out with a hand that trembled. Keep it. We are good. Dominic glanced at the cash. Then he looked at Mick's hand. You touched her, Dominic said flatly. It was not a question. You put your hands in her pockets. Grab him. The command was almost a whisper. The two bodyguards moved with frightening speed. Before Mick could even scream, he was slammed against a dumpster. The other two thugs exchanged a look and then ran, sprinting past Dominic. Dominic did not even glance their way. He let them go. He was only interested in the rat. Dominic walked right up to Mick. He removed the cigar from his mouth and studied its glowing end. This is my city, Dominic said with calm certainty. And the people inside this building, the staff, they are mine as well. You tax them, you are taxing me. You threaten them, you are threatening me. I am sorry. I did not know, Mick squealed. You knew. Dominic took the cash from Mick's hand. He turned and walked over to Sophie. He knelt, not caring as the slush soaked the knees of his expensive suit. He held out the money. Are you hurt? He asked. Sophie could only shake her head, words failing her. A violent tremor took hold of her, making her teeth chatter. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. Dominic was there to catch her. His grasp was secure, warm, and powerfully strong. He lifted her effortlessly, holding her steady against his body. The scent of expensive cologne, tobacco, and a hint of gunpowder filled her senses. I can't be seen with you, Sophie whispered, her panic surging back. They'll kill my grandmother. Dominic glanced down at her. No, they will not. He shifted his gaze to Mick, still held fast by the guards. Listen carefully, Mick, Dominic's voice cut through the wind. Your debt is cancelled. This girl is off limits. Her grandmother is off limits. If I learn that even a single hair on their heads has been harmed, I will hunt you down and I will take both your hands, so you never again touch what is mine. Do you understand me? Yes, oh God, yes, Mick sobbed. Put him with the garbage, Dominic commanded. The guards heaved Mick into a nearby dumpster. He landed with a wet smack and a cry of pain. Dominic then focused completely on Sophie. He removed his heavy overcoat, wrapping it around her small frame. It was warm and felt like a shield. My car is just around the corner, he said. I am taking you home. I can't, Sophie objected weakly. This only makes things worse. Sophie, Dominic said, his hands firm on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. You are not invisible anymore. You tried to be, but that ended when you stepped forward to help my mother. Now you are under my protection, and nothing harms what is under my protection. He paused, letting his words sink in. Then more gently, he asked, Where does your grandmother live? We should send some men to watch the nursing home to be safe. Sophie stared at him, seeing the capacity for violence he held. But she also saw the man who recalled a blue jay and a simple ribbon. It hit her with a frightening shock that she had merely swapped a debt to a thug for one to a king. Rogers Park, she breathed. She is at St. Jude's. Dominic gave a slight nod. He steered her toward the alley's exit, his arm a protective shield at her back. Let us go, he stated. You are done with that job tomorrow. What? I can't. I require the money. You will not be a waitress any longer, Sophie, Dominic explained, opening the door of his large vehicle. My mother needs a companion who can speak her language, and I need someone I can trust. He paused, his dark eyes intense. And at this moment, you are the only one in Chicago who has been honest with me. The Moretti family estate was in Lake Forest, a massive structure of limestone and wrought iron secured by a gate that looked strong enough to halt a tank. Publicly, it was a cherished historical landmark. In the criminal world, it was the command center where Dominic Moretti shaped the future of Chicago. For Sophie, it was a beautiful cage, but one that contained a warmth she had never known. 2 weeks had passed since that night in the alley. Sophie had left her job at the Onyx Room the very next day. Her grandmother, Rose, was now in a private suite at St. Jude's, paid for by a front company that Sophie knew traced back to Dominic. A discreet but capable security team was posted outside her grandmother's room. Sophie now occupied a room in the guest wing of the Moretti estate, a space bigger than her old apartment, with a view of the frozen lake. Her role was clear: be Isabella's voice and her friend. Each morning, Sophie would join Isabella in the sunroom, where they enjoyed tea and played chess. And they communicated. Sophie's hands would fly, interpreting the news, the staff's gossip, and the memories Isabella held inside her. Isabella was starting to flourish. The fog of confusion that had clouded her at the restaurant was lifting. As she could communicate again, her sharp mind re-emerged. One morning, Isabella was watching Dominic in his study through the glass doors. He was pacing during a phone call, his tie loosened, and his face set in a scowl. "He loves you," Sophie voiced, then signed the words. "He wants to keep you safe." "Safety is dull," Isabella signed back, her fingers moving fast. "I want grandchildren. I want this house to be noisy. And I want him to look at a woman the way he looks at you when he thinks nobody sees." Sophie flushed a deep red, almost fumbling her teacup. "He does not look at me that way. My ears do not work, little bird, but my eyes are perfect." Sophie glanced over at the study. Dominic had stopped pacing. He looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. His scowl softened into a subtle, almost invisible nod. The link between them was like a live wire, humming with tension. That evening, the weight of her new reality settled in. Dominic came into the library as Sophie was reading. He looked bone-tired. There was a fresh bruise across his knuckles and a dark splatter on his cuff he had tried to remove. "How was she today?" he asked, pouring a glass of whiskey. He did not offer any to her, knowing she did not drink. "She is happy," Sophie replied, placing a marker in her book. "She beat me twice in chess and wants to attend the opera gala this Saturday." Dominic froze, the glass pausing on its way to his lips. "The charity ball? Absolutely not." "She found the invitation on your desk," Sophie said gently. "She has been talking about it since this morning. She mentioned she has not worn her emeralds in 5 years. She just wants to feel normal, Dominic." "It is not safe." Dominic's voice was hard as stone. "The Oanians have been silent since the incident. Too silent. Taking her into a public space is a security nightmare." "She is your mother, not your prisoner," Sophie retorted, surprised by her own courage. Dominic spun to face her, his eyes blazing. "Do you have any idea what happens if I make a mistake? Do you understand how men like Mick O'Shea try to get to a man like me? They do not target me directly. They target what I love." He stopped abruptly. The silence in the room was heavy. "What I love." He had not intended to say that. The words hung in the air. He meant his mother, of course, but the look he gave Sophie, fierce, hungry, and full of fear, hinted that the list of things he loved now included one more person. Sophie rose and went to him. She was no longer the timid waitress from before. Living here, seeing the weight he shouldered, had made her strong. "She needs this," Sophie whispered. "And perhaps you do as well. You cannot keep the people you care about in a glass box." Dominic looked down at her. He lifted his calloused hand, his fingers brushing against her cheek. His thumb softly traced her bottom lip. "If we go," he said, his voice raspy, "you will stay right by her side. You do not leave her for even 1 second. You are her ears. You are her protection." "I will not leave her," Sophie vowed. "And Sophie," Dominic leaned closer, his forehead touching hers, "if anything seems wrong, if you see anything out of place, you come to me. Do not try to be a hero. You run straight to me." "I promise." He kissed her then. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, tasting of whiskey and fear, and a longing so powerful it felt like she was drowning. When he finally let go, he had the look of a man who had just accepted his destiny. "Find a dress," he said gruffly, turning his face away. "Something very expensive. We are going to the opera. The Chicago Lyric Opera House was a grand hall of gold leaf and crimson velvet, alive with the city's most powerful figures. Senators chatted with tech moguls while crime bosses in tuxedos shared drinks with judges. It was the single night of the year when the boundary between legal and illegal blurred for charity. Sophie was in a midnight blue silk gown, chosen by Isabella, with long sleeves and an open back. She felt elegant, but also completely vulnerable. She remained at Isabella's side, constantly surveying the large room, her hands poised to translate. Dominic was a formidable presence in his tuxedo. He moved through the elite crowd with a deadly grace, shaking hands and offering tight smiles, but his eyes never stopped scanning. His top lieutenants were positioned discreetly around the venue, their earpieces hidden. Isabella was glowing. She held court, smiling as guests approached, waiting for Sophie to sign their compliments. "They are all snakes," Isabella signed to her privately, her public smile never wavering. "That man in the gray suit owes Dominic $2 million. Sophie had to suppress a laugh. "He says you look very beautiful, Mrs. Moretti." The evening was perfect until the intermission began. People started moving toward the grand staircase for champagne. The sound in the room swelled into a mixture of laughter, clinking glasses, and the orchestra warming up. Sophie felt a strange unease on the back of her neck. She looked up at the mezzanine. Waiters were circulating with trays. One of them, a tall man with a scar over his lip, was not watching his tray. His gaze was fixed on Dominic. Sophie observed him. She knew the flow of restaurant service, the way a waiter should carry himself. This man moved with the discipline of a soldier. He lifted a hand, pretending to scratch his ear. Then, he tapped the side of his nose. Sophie's blood ran cold. It was the signal, the very same one Mick had used at the Onyx Room. She looked across the balcony and saw another waiter near a private box tap his nose in return. It was more than a signal, it was a trigger. Sophie saw Dominic 10 feet away, caught in a conversation with the mayor. The roar of the crowd was deafening. A scream would be lost, or worse, it could cause the gunman to fire wildly. Isabella was right beside her. She had to get a warning to him without making a sound. Sophie moved directly into Dominic's line of sight. She did not wave or yell. She simply lifted her hands to. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes met his with urgent meaning. Dominic saw her, and his words stopped. Sophie's hands cut through the air. "Trap," she signed. Her gestures were sharp, like a soldier's. 3 men disguised as waiters. North balcony, west exit, armed. Dominic gave no reaction. He did not glance at the balcony. His calm demeanor never broke. He smiled at the mayor. "Mr. Mayor, if you will excuse me," he said politely. "My mother seems to need some air." He turned, his hand reaching for the small of his back. He tapped a specific rhythm on his earpiece. "Code Black," he whispered. "Mezzanine staff." Then, the room exploded into chaos. The fake waiter on the balcony knew his cover was blown. He drew a silenced pistol from his jacket. "Down!" Dominic shouted, tackling the mayor and pushing Isabella to Sophie. Sophie seized Isabella, yanking her behind a marble pillar at the exact moment the stone exploded from the impact of bullets. Panic broke out as screams filled the air. The grand ballroom became a scene of pure chaos, with guests trampling one another to escape. Dominic fired back with expert precision. His bodyguards moved in, forming a protective barrier of body armor around the column. "Evacuate them!" Dominic yelled at Luca, his head of security. "Use the service elevator!" "Dominic!" Sophie cried out, holding Isabella tightly. "Go!" Dominic's gaze was frantic as he looked at her. "I will be right behind you. Now go!" Luca took hold of Sophie and Isabella, guiding them quickly through a side entrance into the kitchen hallways. The terrifying sound of gunshots followed them. They ran down the corridor. Isabella struggled for breath, her hand on her chest, but she kept moving. When they arrived at the service elevator, Luca hit the button hard. The doors slowly opened. "Inside," Luca commanded. Sophie shoved Isabella forward, then cleared her throat. But just as she was about to step in, a massive metal fire door crashed down, activated by the alarm. It sealed the hallway from the elevator. Luca and Isabella were in the elevator. Sophie was trapped outside. Sophie! Isabella shrieked, her voice muffled as she pounded on the doors. Go! Sophie shouted back. Get her to safety! The elevator doors closed, leaving Sophie by herself in the corridor. She heard the sound of heavy boots echoing on the tile floor. She spun around to see the scarred imposter at the far end of the hall. A wound on his shoulder was bleeding, and his face was contorted with rage. His eyes found Sophie. You, he sneered, the little sign talker. He lifted his pistol. Sophie stumbled backward on the slick floor. There was no escape route. The fire door behind her was sealed. She shut her eyes, bracing for the gunshot. Bang! The blast was incredibly loud, yet Sophie felt nothing. She opened her eyes to see the gunman lying on the ground, a bullet hole in his forehead. Dominic stood over him, holding a silver pistol with smoke rising from its barrel. His appearance was a mess. He had no tie, and his shirt was covered in someone else's blood. He walked over the body, his gaze locked on Sophie. Without saying a word, he closed the gap between them and pulled her into a fierce embrace. He held her so tightly she could feel him trembling. The most powerful man in Chicago was shaking. I told you, he murmured into her neck, inhaling her scent. I told you to remain with her. The door, Sophie cried, clutching his torn shirt. The fire door blocked me. I could not. It is all right, Dominic soothed, placing kisses on her hair and face. You rescued us. You rescued them all. I was watching your hands. I saw them. He drew back slightly, holding her face in his hands. Your message reached me through all that chaos. Nobody else could have managed that. Is she okay? Sophie questioned. Luca called on the radio. She is in the car and she is safe. Dominic gently brushed her cheek with his thumb. But we need to leave now. The Oanians are behind this. It was a desperate attack. They are reckless. He gripped her hand. Are you able to run? Yes. Then run beside me and do not let go of my hand. The conflict that followed was over in 3 days. It was a quick and savage war conducted in secret. The Oanian family made a fatal mistake with the botched hit at the opera. They put civilians and officials at risk, breaking the city's quiet agreement. Dominic did not have to handle it all himself. The other crime families, appalled by the brazen act, turned against the Oanians. Mikosha was discovered in a car trunk at the airport. The Oanian leaders escaped to Ireland with no plans to come back. On the 4th day, Chicago was quiet again. This time, however, it was a peaceful quiet. Sophie was on the estate's terrace, covered by a cashmere blanket. Bright winter sunlight bounced off the fresh snow. She observed Isabella showing Dominic how to sign. They sat together on a garden bench. Isabella laughed as she guided Dominic's clumsy fingers. No, do it this way, Isabella's hands explained. Your thumb should be out. You just called him a donkey, not stubborn. Dominic's brow furrowed as he fixed his hand position. That is much better, Isabella signed, although you are still a donkey. Sophie chuckled and carried a tray of espresso toward them. Dominic glanced up at her. The marks on his face were healing. He reached for the tray she was holding and placed it on the stone table. He then took her hand in his. Please sit, he requested. Sophie did. Isabella observed them with a knowing look in her eyes. She picked up her coffee and quietly angled her chair to face the lake, allowing them a private moment. The official police report was released today, Dominic said softly. It is being called a gang incident. No one was named. You are not implicated, Sophie. You can return to your apartment and your old life. Your grandmother's medical bills are covered for the next 10 years. You have your freedom. A heavy feeling grew in Sophie's stomach. Are you dismissing me? Dominic stared out at the water. I am offering you a way out. You witnessed what this life is like. It is violent and terrible. You do not belong in this darkness, Sophie. You are better than this. He released her hand, and the loss felt sharp. A car can be ready to take you to Rogers Park in less than an hour. Sophie gazed at him, recognizing the hurt in his expression. He was trying to keep her safe in the only manner he understood, by creating distance. He was afraid the next attack would be fatal. She glanced toward Isabella, who was observing a bird on the snow-covered ground. She looked at the imposing house that had become her home. Sophie rose to her feet. Dominic flinched, anticipating her departure. Instead, she positioned herself directly before him. She paused until he met her eyes, then lifted her hands. "For 23 years, no one noticed me," she signed deliberately. "I was unseen at work, and unseen in my life." Dominic watched her hands, entranced. He could read every sign, having practiced diligently. "You noticed me," she continued. "You allowed me to be heard. Returning there means I will be invisible again. I do not want to be safe, Dominic. I want a voice." She put her hands down and spoke with a clear, firm tone. "I am not leaving this place unless you want me gone." Dominic rose from his chair slowly. He gazed at the quiet waitress who had entered his dangerous world and calmed it with her silence. "I want you," he stated, his voice filled with emotion. "I need you more than my own life." "Then you must stop pushing me away." Dominic produced a small velvet box from his coat. He glanced from the box to her face. "I had planned to wait," he confessed. "Perhaps 6 months, or a year. But I came too close to losing you, and I am done wasting time." He opened the box. An antique emerald ring, encircled by diamonds, rested inside. It was the ring Isabella had not worn for so long. "My mother presented this to me today," Dominic explained. "She told me that if I allowed you to go, she would no longer consider me her son." Sophie gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Sophie Bennett," Dominic began, as he knelt on one knee before her. "Will you speak for me? Will you be the heart of my life? Will you marry me?" Sophie glanced over at Isabella, who had turned back to watch. The older woman was smiling broadly and giving an enthusiastic thumbs up. Sophie's eyes returned to Dominic. The most feared man in the city was kneeling, awaiting her answer. She made no sound. Her hands remained still. She just knelt in the snow next to him and gave him a kiss. In that quiet winter garden, with only his mother and a bird as witnesses, the timid waitress was crowned a queen. The violence had ignited a war, but silence had ignited a future. That was the story of how Sophie Bennett went from serving tables to running a kingdom. It had nothing to do with weapons, wealth, or influence. It was about the single thing Dominic Moretti could never purchase: a person who could genuinely understand him. In a loud and chaotic world, Sophie was the one person who could truly hear him. If you enjoyed this tale of romance, peril, and the strength of silence, please hit the like button. Your support is a huge help to this channel. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you always know when a new story is posted. What choice would you have made? Would you have accepted the offer to leave or stayed with Dominic? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you for listening, and I will be back with another story soon. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.